All right, this is Notes 5.1, Introduction to Biodiversity. It's January 2021, and we are doing this online lesson. So you should have your Notes 5.1 paper out, and you'll fill in the red here on this answer key as I walk you through a little bit through these notes. So this is just kind of an introduction to some terms that we talk about when we talk about biodiversity. So number one, biodiversity is just the variety of life on Earth. So that's your first term. You looked at a lot of biodiversity with our iNaturalist surfing activity. So we looked at all sorts of different species and their cool different shapes and forms. And it's just the diversity of life, biodiversity. Okay, there's three categories of biodiversity that we look at. Okay, we look at ecosystem diversity. We look at species diversity, and we look at genetic diversity. So those are our three types of diversity. I'm going to go through these notes quickly. If you need to pause the video at any time, feel free to do that so that you can fill out your worksheet, okay? So our first type of biodiversity that we're going to look at is ecosystem diversity, okay? Ecosystem diversity is simply defined as the number and variety of ecosystems or biomes within a given area. Okay, so remember, an ecosystem is a living or a set of living or non-living factors within a certain area. Okay, so it might be a particular set of species that work and interact together with the different abiotic factors in their environment. And biomes is just kind of another word for ecosystems. It's a type of ecosystem. So for instance, rainforests. We find several rainforests throughout the world, or temperate deciduous forests. I lived in a temperate deciduous forest in Ohio, and I live in another one here in Germany. So those are the same biome, but different ecosystems. Ecosystem diversity is kind of looking at just the diversity of those different ecosystems within an area, or something like that. So Condoran has a diversity of ecosystems. What are the different kind of ecosystems in Condoran? I want you to just take a couple of seconds and think, what kind of ecosystems do we have? Okay, well, one might be cropland, okay? That is a type of ecosystem. Yes, it's man-made, and yes, we really influence it. It's what you would call an anthrome. It's not a biome necessarily. It's more of an anthrome. Anthro meaning mankind. Okay, so cropland is one though. Okay, we could think about the temperate mixed forest. Okay, so that's our ecosystem with deciduous trees. That's like beech trees and oaks, and coniferous trees. So spruces, pines, that kind of deal. Okay. So we have forests that have evergreen trees, we have deciduous trees, they lose their leaves, they change color, okay? So that's one of the ecosystems in the Condoran area. Think about where, this right here is a photo I took of a little insect, and it lives somewhere. Where do you think it lives, okay? It lives in the water. So we can talk about riparian. So riparian and aquatic, basically, ecosystem along the bank of the Condor River. So that's more riparian, and then the aquatic is the ecosystem inside of the Condor River. This is a mayfly larva, so it would be living inside of the Condor River. So we've got cropland, mixed forest, riparian, aquatic. That's the type of ecosystem diversity that we see in Condoran, Germany, okay? Now, here's a question. Why does a mountain have more ecosystem diversity than a pasture does? Okay, if you go to a mountain, perhaps at the bottom, you know, when I was living in Arizona, there was a certain mountain, and at the bottom of it there was a desert, and at the top of it there was snow and pine trees. Okay, that's a lot of ecosystem diversity within one mountain. Just think about the fact that the higher up a mountain you are, the colder it is, and that allows for colder ecosystems, okay? The air is less dense there, it holds less heat, and so it's colder. That allows for other ecosystems like an alpine ecosystem or a tundra ecosystem or a kind of boreal forest ecosystem. So you've got all these other ecosystems that can be in a single mountain. So when you have just a flat area, there's not that much ecosystem diversity. But when you give a mountain in an area, that provides a lot of ecosystem diversity. Okay, you can just look at the mountains behind me where I am right now, and you'll see a grassland ecosystem at the bottom, and maybe an alpine ecosystem at the top. So you see lots of diversity around mountains. Okay, species diversity is the number and abundance of species in a given area. So we're not focusing on ecosystems, we're just looking at the different kinds of species. Okay, I want you to fill out this pie chart here because I want you to know the kind of trees that we have in the Condon Forest. Okay, this is a type of species diversity. 51% of the trees that we have in this area are beech trees. They're the trees that have smooth gray bark, okay, and they're really tall. They grow super fast in tree terms, okay. They are crazy. They're really competitive, and they're almost like, yeah, competitive lions in very slow motion. That's what beeches are, okay, on a tree scale, right? 11% of our trees are oaks. 16% are spruce and fir. So spruce and fir, those are evergreen trees. We have the Douglas fir, another evergreen. We have a pine, okay. So deciduous trees are the other trees, beech and oak trees, and they lose their leaves in the winter, okay, in the fall. So here's a strange trend, okay? If we look at the Earth right here, and we look at where biodiversity is really, like where we see a hot spot of biodiversity, okay? You might think of like, here you have the coral reefs around in this area, or Madagascar. You have a lot of areas here have a lot of species. Notice that you don't have that many up farther away from the equator, but you have a lot of biodiversity close to the equator. Let's consider why that is. Okay, why is that? Well, we have more biodiversity near the equator because there's more consistency in daylight. Okay, if you've ever lived near the equator, you'll know the hours of the days don't really change like they do up here. Here right now in the winter, we have shorter days, and then in the summer we have longer days. But at the equator, it's pretty much the same amount of daylight throughout the entire year. About 12 hours and 12 hours of night, 12 hours a day, 12 hours a night. So animals, plants, they can really adapt to those conditions because they're super consistent. They can just live in them, and they know what to expect. So it's a lot more species can live there. Okay, it takes a special kind of species to live near the farther away from the equator because there's such harsh conditions sometimes. Okay. Think about the fact that more cold-blooded animals can survive in the climate conditions at the equator. So cold-blooded animals would be like reptiles, for instance, so snakes and lizards. You'll notice that they have to stay in the sun in order to keep warm because they use the sun to keep warm instead of their own metabolism for the most part. So at the equator, it's really warm, and so you can have a lot more species of lizards and other such creatures that can utilize that warmth, and so you have more biodiversity. Okay, more biomass provides more shelter and food. So think about the fact that at the equator, you have more rainforests, you have more trees, you have more biomass in general. That's going to provide a lot of shelter for species, food for species, so a lot of species can exist there. Keep in mind, we are not talking about the number of individuals. We are talking about species diversity. So for instance, let's say that I had 100 trees in Condon. Obviously, we have way more trees, but just for analogy's sake, let's say that I have 100 trees, okay? Now, if 99 of those trees were beech trees and 1 tree was an oak, that does not have a lot of diversity. But 51 trees were beech, 11 trees were oak, 16 trees were spruce, 8 trees were fir, 8 trees were pine, and 6 trees were larches and metasequoia, glypto, whatever, you know, you could talk about other trees. That's species diversity. You still have 100 species. You still have 100 individuals. Sorry. You have 100 trees. In one case, you only have 2 species. In the other case, you have over 10 species or whatever, okay? So it's not just that we have more individuals near the equator, but we have more species, types of creatures, okay? So that's what species diversity is. It's not looking at the number of individuals, but just the number of species in a given area, okay? Third type of biodiversity is genetic diversity. So we've kind of looked at ecosystems, big view. We're zooming into species diversity, smaller view, and now we're zooming even further to within the same species. So biodiversity can refer to genetic diversity, which is the diversity of genetic traits within the same species. So genetic traits are just characteristics that are passed on from generation to generation. So individuals of the same species might have different alleles or versions of genes that give them different traits, okay? Remember all those ladybugs that came out around the school a couple months ago? A lot of those ladybugs were the same species, Asian ladybugs, but some were black with red spots, some were red with black spots, some had 2 spots, some had 16 spots, some had a whole bunch of more spots, okay? So you have they're the same species, but you see different diverse traits within the same species. Another example here is the brassica species here. Did you know cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, and cauliflower are all the same species? It's crazy, okay? Cauliflower is the same species as broccoli, which is the same species as cabbage. It's just that we've, over time, humans have selected, over thousands of years, we've selected for different traits, okay? So, for instance, if we had this Brassica oleracea plant and we found 2 plants that had large leaves, okay? If we're selecting for that trait, we're gonna breed out that trait, and so that means all those descendants are gonna have larger leaves. And so over time, if we've selected for larger leaves, or maybe we want a really large stem, so then we get kohlrabi, or if we're selecting for the flowers, then we're going to get broccoli. And so we're just magnifying those traits by bringing together the sperm and the egg from those different individual plants that would have those characteristics, okay? So that's genetic diversity. It's within one species, okay? Solanum tuberosum is this species of potato, and they're all the same species, but we've got purple potatoes, we've got cream potatoes, we've got red potatoes, we've got big potatoes, we've got small potatoes, okay? So where you get all sorts of traits coming out of this one species, okay? So we've talked about the 3 types of biodiversity, biodiversity of ecosystems, biodiversity of how many species you have in an area, so not just how many ecosystems, but how many species. And now we've talked about genetics within one species. I want you to think about genetic diversity within the Homo sapiens species. Who are the Homo sapiens? We are humans, okay? Humans, you are going to go through these and you're going to check which trait you have, okay? Maybe you don't have one and maybe you'll just mark it on the side, okay? But we're going to see tomorrow in our bell work how this compares to the whole class. Okay, so for instance, taste. Guys, I really prefer salty taste. I hate cupcakes, just so you know. And even when I was a young child and there would be cupcakes or something at a party, I would scoop the icing off and throw it away, and then we'd just eat the bread underneath or whatever. I'd much prefer muffins. So I really do not like the sweet, sugary taste. Ugh. And dessert, I even hate dessert, okay? No, I don't hate dessert, I like dessert, but after the dessert, I need to leave the meal with a salty taste. So if I eat a piece of cake, then I have to eat like a sampling of pretzels or something, and before I leave dinner, because that's like, I gotta have something salty, okay? There are many different genes on different chromosomes that actually will influence that, okay? I submitted my DNA into 23andMe, and it said, "Do you prefer salty taste?" And I was like, "Of course I do." And they was like, "Well, here are the genes that told us that you would." And I was like, "What? That's crazy." Okay. So there's your DNA is organized into chromosomes. It's tightly wrapped into those, and so you have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, right? And so those have different genes. Those genes influence different traits that you have. So one trait might be that your ring finger is longer than your index finger, okay? So here's my ring finger, here's my index finger. If I look at them, my ring finger is actually the same, is longer than my index finger, okay? Some of you might have a ring finger that is shorter than your index finger, okay? So ring finger is longer than my index finger. So that's genetic diversity. We're both humans, but we have different traits, okay? Red hair, not red hair. I do not have red hair, okay? There's 3 genes on chromosome 16 that will influence that, okay? Sneezing, I don't know about you, but whenever I see a bright light, I will sneeze. If I look out the window and the sun is shining, I will just immediately start sneezing. That's simply called photon sensitive olfactory nerves. Basically, the nerves inside of my nose are sensitive to the photons coming from the light, and so I will sneeze. About 17% of people actually experience that or so. So if you sneeze in the bright light, that is a genetic factor. That's genetic diversity, okay? I have straight hair. Maybe you have curly hair, okay? Let's see. I have blue, green, and gray eyes, okay? The default is brown eyes. I have a mutation on my chromosome 15. So if you have blue or green or gray eyes, you are mutated. Well, we're all mutated in different ways, right? But that's part of the cool genetic diversity that we see. I'm not colorblind. Mr. Van Meter is colorblind. You should ask him about it. In fact, the next call that you have, ask him why he is colorblind. Just tell him Mr. Elkins told you to ask him that, okay? So that's genetic diversity. He's colorblind. I'm not colorblind. My earlobes are detached from my face, okay? Other people might have their earlobes more closely attached. Multiple genes that affect that. So yeah, go through, maybe compare if you have somebody sitting next to you or other people in the room with you. Try to see what different traits they have. And tomorrow we'll come back and we'll take a tally and see what the most common trait is in our class and look at the genetic diversity within our species, okay? So that concludes notes 5.1. If you have any questions, let me know, and I can walk you through that during access as well. Have a great day.